Hi, everyone. It's Theresa with Crafty with Theresa. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today, I thought I'd share another video that will show you a set of cards that are easy peasy, as my grandkids say. We'll be using a technique called stack and cut. You'll see 4 cards that can be very frugal and only use paper supplies with a little doodling help, plus some cards that are stepped up a bit. I like to give you many options so you can pick the card style that works for you. Oh, and if you stick with me all the way to the end, I threw in a few more techniques as well. So enough of my chatting, let's get to crafting. First, let's take a look at the supplies we'll need. I grabbed some designer series paper and cardstock. The cardstock is, I believe it's blueberry bushel, and then I also grabbed some crushed curry. And here is our first stack and cut. We'll just stack them together, hold them down with some removable tape, and these are your base card pieces. The first cut is 4 inches. We'll rotate the cardstock and cut it at 5 1/4. Now this paper trimmer is a Stampin' Up! Trimmer and it is amazing. And I'm able to do this. If you are not able to do it with your trimmer, just cut these one at a time. Use what you have, but when you get to the designer series paper, I believe your trimmer will probably work for this cut. Our next stack and cut, we'll grab some of that Nest of Winter designer series paper, and the cuts are super easy. You'll make 2 cuts. Now, I picked some pretty generic pieces. However, on the opposite side, they've got some cute little birds, so we can mix and match. You'll see that in just a bit. We'll do that several different ways. I picked up some neutral tone colors and some light and dark colors, so you can make it fun or masculine, whichever you prefer. Our first cut will be at 3 3/4, and the second cut will be at 5 inches. And that'll give you 4 pieces of designer series paper. Now we're going to do another stack and cut. On the 4-inch side, you're going to cut this to 1 3/4, and we'll put that to the side. With the remaining 2-inch piece, you'll actually rotate it and cut it at 2 inches. And that's all for your cutting. And I apologize, it looks like when I taped this, I didn't realize that I was too close to the bottom. So hopefully those dimensions will help you. And I'll add those in throughout this video. Now you can just start mixing and matching them. Now I fidget and I fidget until I get the designs I like. And then I decided to move my bird pattern around a little bit and make a few different types of cards for you. You'll see I do one with the blue background and the other with the yellow. I also change this a bit and I do it in 2 different ways for you. The first one, I put the designs flush in the middle, and I actually think that's the easiest. And I grab my removable tape and I put them together so it'd be easier to glue. Now I did have to do a little bit of an adjustment here. Before I glued it down, I realized I needed to trim a smidge off of the side. Anyone else use that word? I catch myself using a bit, a tad, or a smidge kind of interchangeably for some reason. I'm not sure why. Anyway, I'll remove the tape and go ahead and start gluing it down. Now you can glue this designer series paper flush in the middle, or you can give it that little bit of an opening. And see, I do both ways in this video. Next, because I wasn't sure exactly where I was going, I decided for those of my crafters that want to save a bit of money, you can use the little birdies on the paper and fussy cut them out and use them as your focal point. I cut out quite a few of the birds and the pine cones. For those that are not fans of fussy cutting, there is a bird that is on the stamp set, but I wanted to use a certain sentiment, so I needed to make the birds a little smaller than what's in the stamp set. Besides, if you just want to use the paper bird, they work just fine. Now I've gone through and I've fussy cut both the birds and the pine cones, and you'll see in a little bit that I have a little technique to show you how to help with those white spaces around those items. And I have this little package that I have sitting next to me that actually has all of the pieces into it. I'll use that to store anything that's left over. But if it's not left over, I'll actually put it in something else, and we'll talk about that in a bit as well. But I'm going through and I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do I want to put these together? Love this stack and cut method. I love this actual patchwork type look. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually looking at how do I want to put this together? Do I want landscape? Do I want portrait or horizontal versus vertical? And so I'm going through trying to make my decision. And I'm also looking at another piece, and I'm going to leave this part in for you to see. But if you bought the Nest of Winter Suite, you actually got an embossing folder, and it's a birch embossing folder. And we're going to show that in just a second. But I decided it would be nice on my stepped up cards to kind of put some of that embossing onto the cards themselves. So I have a scratch piece of paper here that I ran through the embossing machine, and it's got that, I used that birch embossing folder. And on the side that's raised, I'm going to actually cut a few strips. And those strips are going to be used in this card, but I also have another card that I'm working on. So I'm just going to cut a few strips, and you'll see in a little bit what I do with those. I actually make some branches. But the technique I wanted to show you here real quick, I took this sample piece and I actually put some early espresso ink on it, and I also, using a Stampin' Spot, and I also used a Cajun Craze. They both turned out great. I'm going to use the Cajun Craze embossing folder for my autumn and fall cards, and then for my Christmas cards, I'll probably use the early espresso. But just a quick technique for you so you can see how that's done. And then next, I'm actually going to grab my mini Stampin' platform. Oh, real quick, I wanted to show you that I do have a little storage brie cheese container lid, and that's what I use to store my little focal points until I'm ready to use them, and I just have them sitting beside me. That's where the little birds and the pine cones went. Also, here is a binder that I keep by my desk that actually has sentiments in it. And you'll see here that the sentiments that I'm looking for are already in that binder. And it is something I want to give to these friends that I'm going to see here shortly. And it's a friend like you brings me happiness. And so I'll just line it up on my mat. I'll grab my Stampin' block and get that straight, and then just get those sentiments done. But I'm also going to, for my stepped up cards, I'm going to actually add that swag. Now I've done it a couple different ways, and I won't go into those, but you can see that any of them will work. Because the great thing is, with a die set, you can, any mistakes that are made around there with ink possibly splattering somewhere, no worries because you have a die cut. But for those that only want to use minimal supplies, this stamp set would work great, and it would not be difficult to actually fussy cut it out as well. I'm just using some white scratch paper here, and I believe it's white willow. So I'll do a few of those in that old olive ink using that swiping technique. And then I'll also, because it's already in the paper, I will use the Real Red Stampin' Write marker to actually color in those berries that are seen. Some of those berries will be covered by the little birdies, or the way we put the cards together. Now we'll take that old olive Stampin' Write marker, and on the brush side I will basically just run it across those leaves until I get the look I want. Now for those that only want to use the minimal supplies, I did take one of those Stampin' Write markers and I basically just added the word hi onto the paper, and then off camera I added some downward strokes and highlights onto that sentiment, and you'll see that on the final card. Now I am no expert at calligraphy or any type of writing specialist. This is just the way I do it, and I think it turned out okay. I've actually done it in certain situations where I just have my grandkids write it in their writing, and that turns out cute also. Then I'm going to decide which one of these birds will look good with this particular card. And I did decide to make this card landscape, the one that is basically using the minimal supplies. Now, because I did have the embossing folder, because I had the Nest of Winter Sweet, I went ahead and used those little branches that I showed you earlier. The Stampin' Die set comes with little branches, well, or twigs, I'm not sure. I decided to use one of those as a branch. So I did cut that out with my die cut. But you could just as easily get brave, take that marker and draw those cute little twigs or leaves. I've done that before in the past also. But I happen to have this cut out and ready to go. Now I will plan on adding those branches directly onto the card. Those are embossed, so those are going to be a little bit more difficult, and they're so tiny it's just not worth it to me. And I don't want a lot of dimension because I may end up mailing a few of these cards. So I will glue those down directly onto that white strip. Now another quick technique, when you're fussy cutting, you can always get close to the edges, the focal point of the focal point, and then just take your early espresso Stampin' Spot and kind of go around the edges, or you could technically take one of your Stampin' Write markers and just kind of fill it in that way if you have one that's close to that same color. I will put some dimensionals behind the bird and even the pine cones, and I'll add those on, and there you have it. And I think this card turned out so cute. What do you think? I thought I'd show you one more card, and this one will be with the blue base, and this one will be a vertical or portrait card. Now I didn't do anything special here, but when I'm coloring smaller things, I took one of the sentiments and I added the little stamp that looks like, I don't know, twigs or a branch or a set of leaves. Well, I decided to make it a branch with leaves. So I decided to color those by just basically using the small tip of the Stampin' Write marker and kind of tracing inside, and then I use the brush tip to fill it in. I like that method because I think it makes it go faster, and for me, for some reason, I seem to stay in the lines better. I have no idea why. Now I do have a boo-boo on here. I wanted to take just a minute to kind of show you a technique here. You could always cover that boo-boo with an embellishment, but there is one thing I wanted to show you. If you don't have one of the mono erasers, It is something I like to do when I don't really want to add an embellishment onto the card. I'm not sure, again, if I'm going to be mailing these or not. My plan is to deliver them, but just in case I have to mail them, I don't want an embellishment here. So I will grab that mono eraser and I'll just take a little time, work at tiny little pieces at a time, and just go across back and forth and remove that additional ink that actually, unfortunately, landed on my white cardstock. If you don't have one, it's not necessarily you could have just put an embellishment on here, but just in case you want to invest in some more, I like to have one of these on hand. Now, I'll add my bird on top of those, we'll call them faux branches, and we'll attach it to the card base. So I know this video is getting long, so I thought I'd go ahead and stop here. Here's a look at all of the cards that were completed today. I hope you enjoyed them. I want to thank you so much for joining me. And if you haven't already subscribed, I'd love for you to join our YouTube family. I have some new subscribers. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this video. For those that have stuck with me, I appreciate your support. And until next time, have a great day.